No, this isn't a war zone. This is downtown Chicago, the river glinting beneath the glass of Trump Tower and those black boats slicing through the water. They're not tourists, they're Border Patrol. Under Trump's latest crusade, Operation Midway Blitz, the border has officially moved inland. 100 miles? 200? Doesn't matter. Trump's America now treats its own cities like occupied zones. Helicopters circle above rooftops. Armed agents march through neighborhoods once known for music, food, and freedom. Their orders: hunt illegal aliens. Their targets: whoever doesn't look like they belong. The Department of Homeland Security calls it preventive enforcement. But when a pastor gets shot in the head with a pepper ball, when families are dragged from apartments in the middle of the night, if this isn't border control anymore, it's domestic occupation. These officers were trained for deserts and rivers, not crowded streets and churchyards. Their tactics were designed for smugglers, not for citizens. But when Trump runs out of enemies abroad, he manufactures new ones at home. And in this America, fear is the currency of power. Every raid, every drone, every uniform in camouflage says the same thing: you are being watched. The Chicago River now flows under the shadow of Trump's name, patrolled by agents armed like soldiers. And the real question is no longer who crossed the border, but when did America become the border itself? They called it Operation Midway Blitz. Sounds like a war movie, doesn't it? Except this one isn't playing overseas, it's happening in your backyard. Dozens of Black Hawk helicopters sweep across Chicago skies. Boats from Detroit patrol the river like it's the Rio Grande, and armed agents rappel through windows of working class homes, pulling families out as neighbors scream. All of it televised, justified, sanitized under the label of law and order. Trump claims it's about safety, about taking back control. But what he's really done is unleash a militarized economy of fear. Every raid means more contracts for private prisons. Every arrest means more funding for security firms owned by his allies. And every headline about illegal aliens means one more distraction from his collapsing trade war and debt-ridden administration. It's the oldest play in the book. When a government can't solve real problems, it invents enemies. And Trump has always needed an enemy: China, the press, the migrants. He doesn't care who, he just needs someone to blame. What started as border security has turned into a $1 billion domestic industry. CBP's budget exploded by 40% in 3 years. They now command more aircraft than most nations' air forces. 60,000 employees, 20,000 agents, and they're not stationed at the border anymore. They're right here in your city. It's no coincidence that their patrol boats drift beneath Trump Tower, because that building isn't just real estate, it's a metaphor. A monument to profit built on fear. He said he'd build a wall. He just forgot to mention it would surround all of us. They said it was about national security. But national security doesn't kick down doors in the middle of Chicago. It doesn't shoot pastors. It doesn't turn federal agents into soldiers of ideology. Behind the propaganda, this isn't immigration control, it's social control. Trump has discovered something powerful. Fear is cheaper than policy. He can't fix wages, healthcare, or the housing crisis, but he can send an army into American cities and make you believe the chaos is someone else's fault. For years, the Border Patrol was an invisible force, men on horseback in Texas, boats along the Rio Grande. Now, under Operation Midway Blitz, they've become a political theater troupe. Black uniforms, black SUVs, black choppers slicing through night skies, every raid filmed, every protest crushed, every scream broadcast live on networks owned by Trump's donors. DHS Secretary Kristi Noem stands at the podium and calls it a show of strength. But whose strength is it, really? Not the workers who lost their jobs in Trump's tariff wars, not the small towns bankrupted by his billionaire tax cuts, not the immigrants who pick America's food but can't feed their own children. This is the strength of a regime that sells violence as virtue, where every tear gas canister is labeled made in the USA, and every headline about illegal aliens buys one more week of silence about the real crisis, inequality. Economically, this new immigration security complex mirrors the old military industrial complex. Each raid justifies a budget increase. Each tragedy becomes another reason to expand authority. Private contractors lobby Congress for more drones, more surveillance, more detention centers, because in Trump's America, fear is profitable. And like any business, it needs growth. The media loops the same images: chaos, danger, brown faces in handcuffs until repetition becomes truth. Meanwhile, Border Patrol boats still circle beneath Trump Tower, a surreal reflection of power feeding on paranoia. When Reverend David Black was shot in the head with a pepper ball, the footage went viral for 48 hours. Then it disappeared, buried under another speech about restoring greatness. No arrests, no accountability, just another incident under review. Because under Trump, the only thing more powerful than law enforcement is impunity. And while Americans argue about walls and borders, the real border, the one between democracy and authoritarianism, quietly dissolves in the smoke of another operation. By now, most Americans have stopped asking why Border Patrol agents are patrolling cities with no borders. Because when you live long enough inside fear, it starts to feel like order. And that's the real victory of Trump's Midway Blitz, not deportations, but domestication. Look closer. The same Chicago neighborhoods raided for immigration crimes also happen to be those resisting rent hikes, striking for better wages, demanding police reform. It's not about citizenship anymore, it's about obedience. Trump doesn't need a wall, he's building a psychological border inside the American mind, a line that separates good Americans from everyone else, dissenters, workers, immigrants, reporters. Once you're on the wrong side of that line, your rights dissolve faster than a tweet can travel. The numbers tell the story. Over 300,000 home raids this year alone. DHS funding up 45% since Trump's Reclaim America plan began. And private detention contracts skyrocketed by 70%. It's not immigration policy, it's a growth industry dressed in camouflage. But here's the darker truth: this machine doesn't stop at immigrants. Once normalized, this kind of enforcement spreads. What begins as border control soon morphs into protest control, press control, population control. It's the same playbook used by every autocrat in modern history. Weaponize fear, legalize it, then monetize it. A senior official off record described it bluntly. The president wants visible power. He wants the image of control everywhere, all the time. And so, in Chicago, the skyline gleams under the glow of Trump Tower while helicopters hover above it, a choreography of intimidation mistaken for patriotism. The sound of blades echoes down the streets like a warning. This is the new America: behave or be branded foreign. Yet the irony cuts deep. While Trump militarizes city blocks, the actual border grows more porous, drug smuggling up 15%, cartel profits rising, northern checkpoints understaffed because their units are now in Chicago. Trump isn't protecting America. He's performing protection at the cost of reality, money, and democracy itself. And when fear becomes theater, truth becomes treason. Ask the journalists arrested for covering the raids. Ask the students deported mid-semester. Ask the pastors bleeding on church steps. History doesn't always announce when freedom ends. Sometimes it just fades out, drowned beneath the noise of helicopters, applause, and the hum of propaganda screens. Trump promised to make America safe again. But safe for whom? Not for the immigrants whose homes are torn apart, not for the workers watching their factories close while DHS orders another $1 billion worth of drones, not for the millions who now live in cities treated like combat zones. The truth is, safety under Trump has become a brand, a weaponized slogan that sells fear as freedom. Every time he says law and order, markets move. Every time he shouts illegal alien, campaign donations spike. And every time an agent fires another pepper ball, another billionaire buys stock in security firms. This isn't nationalism, it's neoliberal authoritarianism in a red hat. Even some of his former allies are starting to whisper it, that the so-called Great Border Project is really a nationwide surveillance pilot, an experiment in turning ordinary policing into permanent militarization. Cities are now test sites. People are data, and immigration raids are just a prototype of what's coming next. Economic control through fear. You see it in every number that doesn't make the evening news. Consumer confidence down 18%. Border enforcement spending up 52%. Small business bankruptcies up 30%. Yet Trump calls this the cost of greatness. But greatness for whom? The corporations winning federal contracts? The lobbyists who built detention centers faster than hospitals? Or the president himself standing above the city that bears his name, watching Border Patrol boats glide past like reflections of his own empire? Chicago has become the perfect metaphor for Trump's America, a place where the line between safety and submission has vanished, where the state doesn't just guard the border, it is the border. And as the helicopters fade into the horizon, you're left with the sound that defines this new era, not the roar of engines, but the silence of a public too afraid to ask why. Because once fear becomes routine, resistance feels illegal. And that's exactly how authoritarianism wins. Not with tanks, but with paperwork. Not with wars, but with raids disguised as order. This is the real Midway Blitz. Not a campaign to protect America, but a slow, grinding occupation of its soul. Trump promised to make America safe again. But let's be clear, safe for whom? Not for the immigrants whose homes are raided in the middle of the night. Not for the workers whose factories shut down while DHS spends billions on drones and riot gear. Not for the students deported before graduation or the journalists silenced for asking questions. Safety under Trump has become a business model, and fear is the currency. Every time he says law and order, the markets move. Every time he shouts illegal alien, defense contractors cash in. Every protest becomes a budget request. Every arrest becomes a campaign ad. He's turned pain into policy and policy into profit. That's not leadership, it's capitalism with a badge. The numbers are brutal. Since Operation Midway Blitz began, federal spending on domestic enforcement has soared 52%. Private detention firms have tripled their valuation, and the top 5 security contractors, all with ties to Trump's donors, report record-breaking quarterly earnings. Meanwhile, wages are stagnant, debt is climbing, and small businesses are dying faster than they can apply for federal relief. So what's really being protected here? Not the people, not democracy, just the balance sheets of those who benefit from chaos. Trump's version of America runs on 2 engines, fear and distraction. While the public argues over migrants versus jobs, the administration quietly rewires the economy to feed an industrial complex of surveillance and suppression. It's not immigration policy, it's a revenue stream, a $1 billion pipeline from public panic to private profit. The longer America stays afraid, the more money his circle makes. But there's something even darker underneath. Authoritarian systems rarely appear overnight. They arrive disguised as safety, as order, as temporary measures. And by the time people realize what's happening, it's already permanent. History repeats itself not because people forget, but because they normalize. In 2025, normalization looks like armored trucks in your city, drones above your schools, and soldiers in camouflage calling themselves protection. This is what Wolf would call the economics of obedience. The system doesn't need you to agree, it only needs you to adapt, to stay silent when a neighbor is taken, to justify when a protester is shot, to convince yourself that it's all for the greater good. That's how freedom dies, not with violence, but with permission. Even within Trump's own administration, cracks are forming. Anonymous memos leak from DHS agents questioning orders, economists warning that this militarization is draining billions from real infrastructure, healthcare, and education. But the president doesn't care because politically, chaos works. Every crisis pushes the next election further out of reach for his opponents. Every act of repression reminds his base that he's still the strong man who can do what others won't. He's not leading a government anymore. He's running a show. And Chicago, that glittering skyline reflected in the Chicago River beneath Trump Tower, has become his stage. The boats patrolling the water are props. The helicopters hovering overhead are sound effects. And the fear on people's faces, that's the applause. America has become its own border, a nation patrolled from within, a country where the idea of the enemy keeps changing shape until it finally points back at you. Because once power learns to feed on fear, it never stops hunting for a new target. And when that fear becomes routine, when the sound of helicopters becomes background noise, you won't need walls, checkpoints, or ID cards to know you've lost your freedom. You'll feel it in the silence, in the hesitation before you speak, in the quiet realization that the border you were told to fear is now inside your mind. That's the final victory of Operation Midway Blitz. Not a million deportations, but a million people who've stopped believing they can resist. Trump said he would protect America. What he really did was occupy it.